Thank you all for joining us tonight for our poetry reading. Do people want to take an opportunity to gather more together? To be more intimate, perhaps? You all are good. Is there anyone? Okay. I won't pressure you then. I won't pressure. Okay. All right, so as I said, thank you for coming to our poetry reading tonight. Just to give you a sense of how we'll proceed, I'll introduce each poet on their own, and they'll have about 20 minutes to share with you, and we'll close with all three of them willing to take your questions at the end. So that's how we'll proceed, and we'll go in the order of the program. So first, it's my delight to introduce Vievee Francis. Vievee Francis is the author of the forthcoming poetry collection, Horse in the Dark, winner of the 2010 Kavikanam Northwestern University Poetry Prize. She's also the author of Blue Tail Fly, a collection of poems published in 2006. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in numerous journals, anthologies, and textbooks, including CALLALOO, Crab Orchard Review, Rattle, Appropriating Literature, Reading, Writing, and Thinking, Best American Poetry 2010, and Angles of Ascent, a Norton anthology of contemporary African American poetry. Edited, I believe, by our own Charles Rowell. She earned her MFA from the University of Michigan, where she was the 2009-2010 Poet in Residence for the Lloyd Hall Scholars Program. She is the recipient of a 2009 Rona Jaffe Award, a 2010 Kresge Artist Fellowship, and of CALLALOO and Kavikanam Fellowships. Please help me welcome Vievee Francis.
Before I start, I just want to say that it's a great pleasure to be here. This is my first time at the Scholars Conference, and I really appreciate your invitation, Charles, and thank you, Sam and Eunice, for putting up with and being patient with me. "100,000 drumfish float upon the waters." Can you hear me? Because I can't hear myself. 100,000 drumfish float upon the waters, Arkansas, January 2011. From a flat-bottomed basket, the fishes poured, more than anyone had ever called from a net, more than anyone could eat in a year. As bread rose from the reeded rim of another basket, rose then jumped as if alive from that knit of reeds. Rose as bread did not over the fires at home. So God must have willed this, must have, how else? And all ate until frightened by such abundance, until made full on the grain of fear. Perhaps the ripened river near Ozark fought the scale at its mouth, spewed back the feast of fish. Oh God, what a mercy to be filled, and what greater mercy to be emptied. Horse in the Dark. Brown as a mule, I stomped through the flocking geese who thought themselves swans. But a mule knows its opposite, and so did I. They were no swans. A horse can be broken by such beauty. A horse may follow it down a slope that will slice its hooves. Beauty, like a restless man in a tall hat. A wandering boy with teeth white as if he had never known meat. The score of water over stones. I leapt up for the rain cloud shaped like a darker horse. Jumped a too-tall fence, believing a horse could be loved more and ridden less. Until we fell apart, the horse I was and I. We who had prayed for a heaven of toothless grain and barley. How did we untwine? When did my long face pull itself back into this form? How did words replace nay? 2 legs took my trot, and I, freed of my horse self who lay dead to the world, I ran through the clover, on 2 legs, ran and ran. In this poem, one thing to note, I live in a city, inside of a city. I live in Hamtramck, Michigan, which is inside of Detroit, Michigan, and it's largely a Polish community. And one of the things I enjoy eating is duck blood soup, or chocolate soup, because it's sweet and it's slightly brown. And I reference that in this poem. Loblolly pine in a field of hollyhocks. There is sweetness. Oh, yes, there is. Like a thin pistil of honeysuckle, gone almost as soon as it's sucked. Lips pursed just so. Like a needled pine with blossoms at its feet and far afield. And the slobbering bees bobbing punch drunk, so sweet to inhale the late afternoon and the slight damp, hint of dew or the rain to come, like the rough lick of animals, a whistle, a rude joke in the ear, trill of dying cicadas, a mouth of sour mead in the quickening day. Dear, but not innocent, not the purity of some child, no virgin's fond, no. Sweetness like joy must emerge from the soil, from the torn fruit grown ripe to bitter, not the penitent's vision, nor the onanistic ecstasy of a lonely saint, but the sweetness found in a stain of wine, or the cloy of blood soup, thickening as it cools. The venerable fisherman speaks again of his days. This poem is written for the venerable Bagwang Lisang Chul, who found his boat in North Korean waters. To fish, to know their mouths, the shimmering flesh, the thrash within the net, flick of knife, fleck of scales. Who can smile looking back? Once I was a fisherman, a man of the water, blood-soaked deck and slicker, of the mud and its secret pockets, of the water and what catches the light below, water that cools the skin, a man of the rivulet and the riven, belly pouring out its quick life. I look over the hills as if forgiveness might be found just there. I was a fisherman. I had a wife. I had children I could feed whose palms were plump as fish bellies, always dancing, jumping. There was a storm, no other sign, and a boat is indifferent. North or south, I was still a fisherman, a fisherman. I had a wife who was not yet cleaved. I had children eager at play as carp. Some I threw back, it's true. I was a fisherman, not a spy. So when the prong slid electric between my legs, I thought it was an eel. Perhaps it recognized me. Perhaps I had chopped off its head on the other side. Torture. My hands danced in front of my face, then up, toward a light. A song played in my right ear, the perfect song for a day I could not hold. Outside, my wife swam away, undulant as a strand of hair swirling beneath the surface. Phlegm, spit, blood, piss, the outpourings of the body. I will spy. I was never a spy. I have been thrown back into the world with a hook in my mouth. My hands jump at unexpected times, mocking, flapping. With my feet in the ice tub, I saw a fish at my ankles. It was my child come to save me. I reached for, but the fish slid from my grip, a shimmer under the surface like a thrashing carp, convulsively mouthing, goodbye, 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 goodbye. Are you listening? I said, I am no spy. Ask the fish. I said, only release me, and I will spy. Torture. I was a fisherman. I said, I only want to go home, to be thrown back. Come, let's walk to the river. Let's hear what the fish have to say. Cane, sweet and dusty as a teat. I'm originally from rural Texas. Oh, I loved the cane. I'd take a piece, cut with a pocket knife from the stalk, sew like bamboo, and bite hard into the sweet matter. Let it fill my mouth with the life I had then, enough dust to choke on, and the milk shot warm and blood-stained into the pail. Say it. Say it any way you can. He hit her on the back of the head. Truth finds its own coarse measure. Not long out of diapers, I wore purple hot pants and danced a funky chicken. There was the boogaloo, and my aunt's red wig that went over her already red hair. I had her legs, dancing legs, and quick feet 2 times. When he hit her, it knocked the wig off her head. I knew men even then. I had uncles and a father. We jumped high in the living room, our lives a quick step. When I held her in my arms, did I do any good? She was hip, too cool, a Saturday night cigarette, a bone-handled pistol in the panty drawer. Say it louder. I was proud. I held my head up high with my sally-legged aunt. I kicked my heels and my uncle laughed. He had a Western name, Marshall. This was Texas, a man's world, but women raised those men out of cotton, out of dust. Bred longhorns and bullshit. She could shoot, but she didn't. She said, sing it, baby. Please, please. I got down on my knees and cradled her son's head in my small arms. Out of memory, the thread of truth, a red daisy chain, blood running down a back. He hit her again. I was wearing my purple hot pants, ones that matched her, or I was in my pajamas, holding my cousin's head in my arms, covering his eyes, his mouth with my flat chest, my fingers in his hair, red as his mother's, coarse, as in unrefined. She wore a wig that fell off her head. He screamed, fat whore. She screamed, baby, please don't go, then let her pony legs go to sticks, thin as a bluebonnet stem, Texas flower, weed. When I held her in my arms, it did no good. When my mother held her in her arms, she did not come back. I said, don't go. She said, I'm black. I sang, say it loud. He said, black whore. It was a boogaloo. It had been danced before. My uncle laughed his laugh. It fell like a wig to the floor. He threw back his head, conked, slick as the blade of a razor, and I'm saying it loud, loud the way truth comes out when it's been held to your chest like a little boy's cries, a boy who will grow into his father's shoes, dance of generations, cotton-eyed marshals, green-eyed brown men. She said, you can't trust men like that, turned me around, said, do your dance, girl, sing your song. She could shoot, but she didn't, someone else did. I'm saying, in a bar, miles and years up the road, my uncle fell like a wig hitting the floor. Juke joint, chin stomp, James Brown always spinning, somebody always hitting the floor. He was big stuff in a slim suit. Cool as Saturday night he fell, his hair flawlessly coiled. Thank you. I will be there forever and was never there at all. Wheels will roll muddy through the field. A tick will be sucked from the knee. Men with their boiled egg skin will say, hot today, and swat at flies with feed ads. The bottom land will have its snake and barefooted children. Overalls dangle from the line. Overalls hang off hard, dark frames. Someone selling ribbon cane will offer a suck, cane sweet and dusty as a teat. What bone will be snapped for the meal? Coons will slip from the limb. The pines will keep their secrets as they always have. Arrowhead and skull, rope and suddenly rich earth where there should be sand. mounds under mounds. A rabbit will be loved, then skinned and eaten. The field will reclaim itself. You will see no tire tracks. None ever were. The offer. It was not by body, not the body, no. It was by voice, a voice enmeshed in the foam's frolic and swish, a voice risen by subtle, interminable wave, like the note lifted from an ivory key, touched just so. And what was in her sudden coloratura? Knowledge, my dear, knowledge, the depth of ages, all the one listening knew or did not know. She knew, darlings, everything, the sum and its measure, the before and before. Wisdom wound from her mouth like a strand of sea pearls, diaphanous, light as bubbles, those rounded spheres of light, so deceptively light, the waters of chaos given shape and sound by the song, dear ones, my doves. Who would not have been drawn to such as she? We cannot blame the adventurer so enthralled, nor can we blame that siren, she who could not contain her ecstasies, singing, singing, with her bottom lip so sweetly tucked, and her teeth gapped so slightly, and from that jagged perch holding her great weight, the music, the gist of desire, blew like a hardening wind across those waters, and she sang, listen, my sailor, my pirate, such a small leap from your lonely boat to me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I am not going to delay our enjoyment. We will move on to Dawn Lundy Martin. Dawn Lundy Martin was awarded the 2006 Cave Canem Poetry Prize for her manuscript A Gathering of Matter, A Matter of Gathering, which was also published in 2007 by the University of Georgia Press. She is the author of The Morning Hour, selected in 2003 for the Poetry Society of America's National Chapbook Fellowship. Among her many honors include Massachusetts Cultural Council Artist Grants for Poetry in 2002 and 2006, and the 2008 Academy of American Arts and Sciences May Sarton Prize for Poetry. Her poems have appeared or are forthcoming in many journals, including Hambone, Tuesday Journal, CALLALOO, Nocturnes, and Encyclopedia. She is a founding member of the Black Took Collective, a group of experimental black poets. She's co-editor of a collection of essays, The Fire This Time, Young Activists and the New Feminists, and the New Feminism. And she's also a founder of the Third Wave Foundation in New York, a national young feminist organization. She's assistant professor of English in the writing program at the University of Pittsburgh. Please join me in welcoming Dawn Lundy Martin.
Hi. I'm going to read from Discipline. So I want to say a few words about it. So it's a collection of poems, mostly prose poems, all untitled. And Discipline is kind of a multiple exploration. So one of the things that I was thinking about when I was putting the collection together is the difference between making a choice, or having a compulsion, or kind of discipline, I guess, in the Foucauldian sense of the word, and there's also this kind of notion that is, and I don't know if it's apparent or not, that's a kind of thread through the book, a kind of like sadomasochistic thread. I don't know, you can tell me after if you think you see that in the poems that I'm going to read. On the other side, I was thinking about, too, my father was dying of cancer 6 or 7 years ago, and I kept this journal. And so some of the poems are pulled from that experience in that journal. So I'll read to you, I think in the order that they appear here, and then I'll read some newer poems. The first poem actually is not a prose poem. Excreta, or sentence, or ripe. Here the mouth held, grip over, and flood liquid, a defecated magic. Everything said was surprising. Cosmologica in seconds, in breath attempts under weight metal. Here the jar. Here the inside of the jar. Excruciation fixed, or phrase, or doubt. 3 went in and 3 emerged, although significantly reduced. Dispossession fragrance like mules or dung. When one is told the structure or the method or the staggering absence of or the omnipresent existence of, it becomes difficult to get on the subway or to bathe one's own body. These are acts of forgetting, though they appear to be acts of resistance or love. Actually, here in the book, I'll say there's binary code. So, which I won't read because that would be boring, just me reading these ones and zeros. But if you're so inclined, if you actually have this book and to translate it, feel free. It's a translation conference, right? Not so much a name, but the result of a name as a metaphor for the eyes inward turning. It might say what the thing is, or it might not know. So then, heritage as fantasy, that the seer looks toward a past, markers of it in food, in location, in wrecked bodies, flung, stress, etc. A want toward warmth, highways of sun through windows, where it might not reach. So when I imagine the father as a boy, he said, in fields a child, and here the hand holds an infant, his, and jumps from a very tall building or threatens to jump in the name of something believed. Bodies in uncommon strobes, what mystery in jaunty bodies, or are they murderous bodies? Who can tell? I can't tell. Streaming video, private locations, large hard hands inserted in zippers. There's unrecognizable scent. There are a we there, a timeless we, a we of all on a wall, we that drift in and out of doors and into musty bathrooms that feel wet all the time. How many ordinances exist? Local communities flailing, screaming into night as fish would into night. What kind of brilliant stare in their scrubbed features, their lips smacking on cream cheeses. I want to laugh, but repulsion invades the body, makes it want to pee. Every silent wailing could find its place in these acts, where the other meets the self, meat flesh. Just order the fucking latte. I'm a living example, bootstrap fool, hanger, honor. Is there a thing to recover? National dialogues on the blotting screen. Everywhere is down from here, they say, unless. A voice is bare, inaudible, it mouths. My father is half his normal weight and in a bed in Hartford Hospital, hollows or glass, fragments of being or nothing, near not being, precisely what the body resists the body is. They turn the television on for comfort. They tuck the sheets and pull them into neat corners, its edges of order. We had a house full of books. Mothers warn against usual dangers, men and the sun. Rough hands of the friend shield against strangers. It becomes difficult to imagine a harmful stranger. You are supposed to write an essay titled Dirty Love, but you can't because you are exhausted by him, the friend, his attic apartment, his slack bathrobe, his rum and cokes and Kent cigarettes. Your skin was lighter when you were 11 and you were more desirable. Fluorescent supermarket lights make the whole thing worse. Reflections, comeuppance. Before the effort and desire, one hurries into the porn store and then hurries out again. She is the only one hurrying. Everyone else is motionless. Recover-ing. One remembers being someone's girl, the possession of someone else. That kind of safety. For what, then? Flap of pages turning. Here is the size of a hole. Here is the size of what happened before and of no one watching. Every day it happens or doesn't happen. The eye struggles to become a part of the reeking body. The body drifts off to fuck like a ghost. In countries with barriers, an attack unwarranted, wrists held tight behind the back, great views from the wooden window toward whatever. Iowa, strict Jesus, a cock stinking belligerently. In December, lights blanket snowing streets, a dark girl under cover of white. There is no world outside of this, walls of white, and white bliss. Flakes sting skin, undeniable and wanted. We could find incidents toward exigencies, moments that should urge, compel, which accumulated evidences would suffice. There are bodies stuffed in trees. We know that. We see them when we do not anticipate them, hungry and echoing into chilled air. I'm going to switch gears. I think that some of the poems that I'm going to read are love poems, but I'm actually not quite sure. I think this first one might actually be a love poem. And so this I have this new chapbook coming out it's a kind of a limited edition letterpress book from Albion Books. It's being published in November. It's called Candy. And one of the things that I did in this book is to take epigraphs from various sources. And so the epigraphs are actually the titles, which I guess is oxymoronic. It makes them not the epigraph in a way, but whatever. And they're borrowed from different literary sources, also email correspondences, and also some of them I just make up. So this one is, I think this is Lorene Nidecker. And so the title is called "Do Not Save Love for Things, Throw Things to the Flood." Ruined inevitably, strange spirit, ghost of your fucked, how to drape fear. Passion is without fear. When the crash happened, we were flying. Distill flesh amid the ruins, now we are one with nature. Screw off, screwing at bottom of driveway. A heart exposed in uncovered afternoon. Hearts beat and then they don't. It's rash, all this. Handsome caliber circle gesture of pumping. Refuse what's prescribed. None of it offers any relief anyway. Sea spill close. We have to move the coast in a mile. People still want houses on the ocean, not in the ocean. Fly then, even if railings present themselves in full weather, focus is not stripping or stripped. I don't know, that wasn't a love poem, that's ridiculous. Okay, I have, there's a moment of somebody screwing at the bottom of a driveway, and I think it's a love poem. Okay. Not that one. Okay. How many minutes? How far am I?
You have 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Okay. So I'm actually going to go back to not do those. I have some other prose poems, and these kind of go together. So I want to read these, and then I'll stop. So this is a new project called Also, Birds, and yeah, they're not love poems either, but there is love in them, I think. They're entitled Divide of Critical Assessment, Relative Closeness, Unfortunate Box, Rigid, no pliable formula in the divide, to avoid catatonic state, glaze in the hole of what's not left over. They say there are traces, that there will always be traces. It's a fiction anyway, a construction of the mind's needs, that they hold on to filament gestures as material. In the hole, we find a digging, fingernails deep in refuse. Here is the trash heap, nothing there except a muted wailing. The orator is on the horn. The orator is telling his life story. We walk the long, hot sidewalk toward water. Touch here is imperative, to hold up contact of suspense and wanting, to prop up or sustain, to call into being from elsewhere or a reminder of access. Lake interminable. I do not know where my house is. Where is my house? Summer steams by. Every border is cocked and ready. Flatten body against cool earth. Lie without sound. Be a cool corpse under wire teeth. The police are so young. They do not hear the wailing. Wailing, I'm told, is a figment of your imagination. What to know of the body's refusal to open, of the body's hidden cave. Put the cave inside another cave so no one can reach it. Perspiration aches. Strain against dirt walls. I have come to you from a metal house. We had steel barriers to protect us from the sun. The lake drifts into forever. Windows here are small, and I cannot see myself in them. What it is to be captured without spoons. Life inside grid object. Replace faces with armor ducts. Drive off fucking cliff. Get all damaged after raging. What holds the structure? Giant ministries, giant everything. They don't want you to hang yourself. Instead, you survive. Spring is here. Let's poison the grass to make it shine. We are shiny people. If you were to hang yourself, you wouldn't die. You don't know how to die. Hurt calm at edge of bay. Today, calm, not choppy. Who's digging inside the earth for metal faces? Superstructures of defense lined outside your window. I'm happy, you say. I'm happy, you sing. Register at the desk. Indicate whether you understand sentences. The American middle class is screwed again, but they don't know it. Politics is a gleaming nowhere. Zizek fantasizes about capitalism's inevitable end. Reviewers want these poems to be more hopeful. Love is obvious. She's a tutu shelter leaning out. Love is miraculous. She's twirling quite naturally. We dangle our feet in a July swimming pool, shoots sparkles from eyes to quiet all our little monsters. Street habits rear up. Any fire, any quell, Who's made it to well-being? The television projects hysterical grief, brown women wailing, fall to knees draped over. We are only who we are supposed to be. No moon tonight, dear one. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dawn. And so we will end with Gregory Pardlo. Gregory Pardlo, an associate editor of CALLALOO, graduated from Rutgers University in 1999 and received the MFA in poetry from New York University in 2001. He is author of Totem, winner of the APR Honickman First Book Prize, and he's translator of Pencils of Rays and Spiked Mace, selected poems of Niels Lingsong. We'll act like that's okay. And also translator of that same author's 39 poems for the Burning Library. Pardlo's honors include Best American Poetry 2010, Cold Front Magazine's Best First Books of 2007, New York Times Fellowship in Creative Writing, and the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Translation. His poems have appeared in such periodicals as Poet Lore, American Poetry Review, CALLALOO, Plowshares, and Harvard Review. He is Assistant Professor of Creative Writing at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Help me welcome Gregory Pardlo.
Thanks a lot. Written by himself. I was born in minutes in a roadside kitchen, a skillet whispering my name. I was born to rainwater and lie. I was born across the river where I was borrowed with clothespins, a harrow tooth, broadside sewn in my shoes. I return, though it please you, through no fault of my own, pockets filled with coffee grounds and eggshells. I was born still and superstitious. I bore an unexpected burden. I gave birth, I gave blessing, I gave rise to suspicion. I was born abandoned outdoors in the heat-shaped air drifting like spirits and old windows. I was born a fraction and a cipher and a ledger entry. I was an index of first lines when I was born. I was born waist-deep, stubborn in the water, crying, ain't I a woman and a brother? I was born to this hall of mirrors, this horror story. I was born with a prologue of references, pursued by mosquitoes and thieves. I was born passing off the problem of the 20th century. I was born. I read minds before I could read fishes and loaves. I walked a piece of the way alone before I was born. I read that with my students, and one very well-meaning student that asked me afterwards, "Do you really feel like a slave?" I don't think you quite got the point of that. No, so we're talking about. I like Dawn was saying earlier about making sort of foregrounding the material of composition, you know, and foregrounding the process. And so I've been interested in taking this historical material that sort of shapes our culture and defines our culture, and collaging it and using it in ways. You know, we talk about Carol Walker. I'm also a big fan of Carol Walker. So thinking about the material in that sense as material, and not so much as sort of a gospel, sort of holy words that we often take the history for. I'm assuming a lot of us know the Gail Jones novel Corregidora. one other thing, I'll try not to speak too much. I'm interested in this manuscript about in improvisations in general. I'm thinking about improvisation as a form that's both static and fluid. So how do we? It's a sort of anti-form. How is there a structure that moving in a structure that isn't limiting? So this is 4 improvisations on Ursa Corregidora, after Gale Jones. My husband Mutt backhanded me down the fire escape out back a blues bar called Happy's. Nothing holds a family together like irony and a grudge. Depends on what you call family. What's left now of the generation I hadn't known I made is just a scar, squoze shut like a mouth that won't eat, a score where doctors had to retrieve the fetus, its tub, and my plumbing all together. Now I'm soundproof, and now I'm forever hollow as a plaster statue. Just as I can't go back to where my mothers cast me out to flatter their memories, chiming, echoing, braiding the wind with their eccentric melody, Mutt can't come back to me no more. I can picture him, though, harassing the shadows of my voice, drunk as a judge. My husband Mutt handled the hose that doused the fire, the reason I can't make babies. I've claimed the blues as a current like electricity, but mine was a combustion engine cutting shapes out of noise. Lying at the bottom of those stairs, I could already feel my machine slipping into pictures of still water. I began swallowing watermelon seeds by the handful, hoping something take root, a vine, a silence. I was reborn at the crime scene. I survived the rent in time to look back on it squeezing shut like a fist, a refrain, echolalia, bad penny, menses, evidence of a pattern we are determined to reveal when we find ourselves standing before the judge, evidence of the devil we're determined to reveal when we're testifying for the jury and the judge. My husband Mutt stared back down the barrel of his years, came up loaded and hapless. I was determined to take him in spite of my history, to refrain from adding to the pattern emerging from the rueful chorus. My mothers cast me as amanuensis to record their versions of the crime. Once upon a time means once and for always and for wherever you are, and now I'm singing blues in a bar revealing as much skin as you should be willing to reveal when you're pouring your seed into the electric element. We are given 2 names, one to work like witness protection and one to carry mechanically to the grave. I never took my husband's name. I imagine that would be as useful as a newspaper covering my head in the rain. Useful as letting my eyes be the judge. My husband Mutt handed me back all the love he felt I had failed to give him. That's saying something close to nothing. Do nothing till you hear from me, he said and smiled. Whoever owns these blues is a matter of some debate. The story of my people unfolds each day like a newspaper detailing a catechism that connects me to history. Are you hurt? Yes, I am the hurt. The silent mouth is the barter. What's a husband good for? Seed money, generations working the fields. Why do we make dreams? A little ritual, a little lining for the purse. Each song is a number of the 7 veils. Each number is a revelation of skin measuring degrees of distance from the crime and from the guilt of the crime. Corregidora, as much kin as we're willing to reveal, lest we be judged. So, one of another take on the improvisation. I have this, I'm going to read a few poems from a couple of series of poems where I'm riffing on, and it's interesting, these poems likewise use the epigraph as a title. And I'm kind of, Doug Kearney said somewhere that he's resisting mastery in his work, and I really like that idea, and I think I'm going to claim that for my own work. Similarly, I'm interested in resisting the mastery implied by when we put an epigraph on our poem that sits like a gargoyle to ward off sort of bad criticism. I got Wallace Stevens on top of this poem. You can't fuck with this, right? So I'm kind of playing with, sort of thumbing my nose at the idea of the epigraph, and the idea that these epigraphs, you'll notice, are all coming from relatively not obscure for this crowd, but for most average civilian crowds with relatively obscure sources. One other thing I wanted to say, they're all 17 lines, and they're all, one series deals with the idea of conatus, and I like the slipperiness of conatus. It's both, it's the animus that everything, all matter contains that allows it to move. In theory, this is whoever the physics, pre-Newtonian maybe? I don't know. And yeah, so conatus has been used in many different ways over hundreds of years. So I was interested in this slippery term, and I'm also thinking about how the automobile is a rather central figure to American culture, literally a vehicle, haha. And the other, and then there's a kind of eco-conscious spin on some of the poems too. And the other term I deal with is clinamen, which is Harold Bloom's term. Heraclitus. No, actually I don't want to read that one, sorry. St. Augustine. If no one asks me, I know what it is. If I wish to explain it to him who asks me, I do not know. Prince calls it little because he imagines a woman's body waist up, the rest corvette, which is French for a sort of girly warship, a chimerical twist on the Freudian cockpit. Who wouldn't want a belly button for a windshield? All us baby ball turret gunners would submit to mother love as long as we were allowed the illusion that we commanded the vessel. This may be why we give them names like Bessie and Lila May, but our cars are more prosthesis than portmanteau. We say horses that muscle and gun, but idle next to one and hear its sputtering Promethean delirium like a hound's twitching dream of dogfights in biplanes that strafe the velvet sky with the leathery helmets of their little red barons. We would have swooped the oil fields where pilot lights burned like Zippos at a rock concert to safeguard our memories of weekends washing father's vet, fearing both its pliant fire and our need to ride in pursuit of some unconscious joy, certain only that we'd know it if it ever could be found. Occam. Every body has an impetus which allows it to continue to move. Being moved is passing from potential to the act. You will often size up the random demographic holiday traffic makes, hoping to see yourself inside a picture bigger than the neighborhood you know. But the knots of cars strung in rows like Incan quipu ordain your destination, for they script your possibilities in the Nielsen lingo, abstracted from ad copy instead of the tangible planet. So who is really driving the soapbox you find transporting your thoughts while you inch the highway like the Pope's bubble mobile? Lines at the toll plaza are a poem where you idle in this way, mindless as Sonny Corleone. Every procession ends in a funeral. Think of the chain gang of reindeer and the tiny hands making toys in Santa's maquilas. Will you spend the whole poem reading bumper stickers and vanity plates, concerned how they outpace you? At the end of this poem full of furtive glances, will you count yourself among the seers or the seen? No one sees you sleeping but your wife, and for her you thought of nothing. Look how little you give of yourself, how little of yourself you have been given. Gassendi, ambulo ergo sum. We labor to maintain them in the macadam fields around Pep Boys, where legs dangle from the maw of upraised hoods like tail fins draping a pelican's beak. We can say about cars what Jefferson said about slavery when seeking pity for his hardships, like holding a wolf by the ears. Talk about awkward. Yet it's for Yet it's for domesticating horses that he charges Europeans with the degeneracy of the human body. Perhaps we are all like him, exhausted by our compulsion to be free from carrying our own weight, human to heap our load on some other burdensome body we've subordinated to our sloth. Who could go on schlepping the lanes flanking Eastern Parkway beneath plane trees as trumpets from dollar vans blow Dixie? Few haven't caved to the runaways' dream of those chariots come to carry us home. Hasidim fill the streets Saturdays with ambling demonstrations of civil resistance. James Meredith trod a shoulder in Mississippi for freedom. We may all go someday pan-like marching, transported by the rapturous clopping of the only two hooves we command. Alfred North Whitehead. I have suffered a great deal from writers who have quoted this or that sentence of mine. Oh, and you'll recognize Gandhi, when you're seeking revenge, first dig 2 graves. Quotation marks tweeze text and lift it to gild the voice of the speaker. Anonymous quotes bestow mystique like a Venetian carnival mask that obscures in order to license. Carne vale, farewell to flesh. Chancing on a fetish for the basis of taste, cannibals dined by firelight on the tongue of the sacrifice. You incarnate the page, give words to the body you consume. Sound it out. Ouroboros, whose mouth is a grave. Your mouth merely gargles its ghost. Air quotes understate cat claws to signify a type of predation. Read here about the kids who followed J&M 8 blocks home, fingers flensing air like thriller zombies. How fresh, how quotable the 2 men must have looked hand in hand through the hood. Let's say the kids wanted a snippet, a sound bite, to prize as the new exotic, a juju to brandish against mystery. Say the beer bottle they threw conveyed a message. You have flavor. We suffer from an ancient envy. Confucius says, before setting out for a quotation, first dig 2 graves. Sorry, it was Confucius. All right, and I'll end with something that we all are familiar with, and that is the conventions of the course description. So we're always sort of urged to design courses, and I'm going to read 2 of these and move through them quickly. So I said, I got your course description. Ghosts in the Machine, Synergy and the Dialogic System. Self-effacing, the number 0 stands austere, a window onto nature's abhorrent force, a hyperborean rebuke to the tropic heat of being. We might say 0 is the perfection of affect, as its pursed lips withhold a disinterested kiss. In this course, we will observe our stalwart and lonely hero 0 and his intercourse with the number 1, or what Nietzsche refers to as Dionysiac rapture, the vision of mystical oneness symbolizing the root assertion of self-surrender, yes. And we will study how this primordial union begets the mystery of Zeno's arrow stitching the sky across a battlefield, or begets the way sweet nothings from a random dialing jailhouse phone might morbidly prick the pulse. We will consider the connotative spark rattling like a pinball in the void between 2 bumpers of denotation, overloading the light bulb above our heads, or worse, animating anxieties strapped to the gurney within. That one hand clapping, for example. For example, the call is coming from inside the house. Shades of green, envy and enmity in the American cultural imaginary. Images of the stud and the buck have an amorously crafted resonance burnished by cultural anxieties, an addict's logic toward the habit they place in the mind and the mysteries we lay at their feet. This course will begin by focusing on models represented in the 1994 Charles Russell film The Mask, and Ang Lee's 2003 The Hulk. The mojo and the genetic regression, the hypersexuality and the rage. These qualities are thrust and airbrushed onto the Bacchic body of the other as we fantasize our repression of them in ourselves, the unquiet threat of psychosomatic greening, a silk garret, an onanistic envy of the other's capacity for release, a monumental iconography of the hermetical black box of the brain. While we might be tempted to reduce these types to the pat dichotomies of comedy and tragedy, this course will examine the ways in which there is but one mask, a Janus-faced cleavage of thou art and thus am I, our goat-sung desires adrift in the wilderness, our telltale passions pulsing beneath the tulips and gladiolas in a mildewed hatbox, the act of masking triumphal and deadly, trembling the bulb on its stem. Thank you.
Wonderful. So what I'd like to do is take just a moment to have us kind of applaud all three at once, please. And so what I thought we would do is have questions all together. So I guess if you all will kind of congregate here and, I don't know, lean or whatever you want to do together. And so we'll have questions for all three together. Just as a way of starting, because our theme is translation, I wanted to just kind of take a moment to remind everyone of that. And I was struck by, and the thing that I'm noticing, of course, this entire weekend, and actually your department chair kind of emphasized this too, is that we're really being dynamic about the way that we think about translation. So I don't want to suggest that you all have to accept what I'm about to say about the way that translation flowed for me in your pieces. You can reject it, that's fine. But I just wanted to make a couple comments and then open it up to everyone else. Is this what you want? Okay. Okay, so what I was saying just quickly is that we're being really dynamic about the way that we're thinking about translation. So even though I'm going to make a couple comments about what I thought about in relationship to translation in each of their presentations, and I'd love for them to respond to what I'm saying, I'm perfectly expecting that maybe they won't accept what I'm saying about translation in each. But in our first reading from Vievee, I was really struck by, I appreciated that you shared with us, the blood stew and the fact that it was sweet. And I love the way that she called our attention to, this is the kind of sweet I'm not talking about, right? And emphasizing this isn't about some kind of childhood innocence or something easy, was part of the poem itself. So I was just interested in the way that we want to think about what are our assumptions about innocence and the way that you're kind of disrupting that or having us think differently about innocence or sweetness or those kinds of things. And then with Dawn's work, I love the way that she was framing things in terms of translation, it seemed to me, by actually saying, well, this might be a love poem, giving us that kind of frame and then taking it back toward the end. So that kind of struck me. There were other moments too, but I'm sure that other people will want to bring them up. So I'll leave that as just the frame comment. And then with Gregory Pardlo, just the fact that we started with those resonances from Frederick Douglass, or at least that's who I associate with the slave narrative tradition. And so this I was born had me thinking, if we're thinking in terms of translation, had me thinking about how all of our work is about, kind of this criticism as we were talking about earlier today with Brent Edwards, and I'm just thinking about how biography itself is a kind of criticism and translation, and the fact that you're bringing that to your students in the way that you kind of shared with us seemed another translation moment. So I just wanted to share those random thoughts, and now open it up to you all.
You don't want them to respond.
Oh, yes. Yes, I do.
Well, there is translation. There's an impact of translation in the poem. The poem you're referring to, Loblolly Pine in a Field of Hollyhocks, and using the blood soup. But I'm thinking of it a little differently, and that is I'm impacted by poems in translation. I read a great deal of poems in translation, particularly poems coming out of Eastern Europe, if you don't mind that frame. And so those are kind of the voices in my head. This third thing, this response to the translation, and so that kind of impacts my diction and my work syntactically. And then living in a community that's predominantly Polish and then surrounded by almost 1 million African Americans, every time I go downstairs, I live in a coffee house, Polish is spoken every single day. And I can still only speak a few words in Polish, right? But some of the rhythms have kind of, there's an overlay of the rhythms in the work. And then in the, I think the fourth poem I read, the Venerable Fisherman Lee speaks again of his days. How I see translation working there is I wanted to talk about a fish story, that phrase, a fish tale, something that's not true. So when the Venerable Bog Wang was a fisherman, he finds himself in North Korean waters and he's taken as a spy. And then he's sent back to South Korea, and he's still thought of as a spy. So he's tortured twice. And at the end of his life, he becomes a monk, but he's never settled inside of his spirituality. His spirit is always restless because no one believes him, right? So I kind of want to conflate his life and ideas, American ideas around the fishtail, which kind of flows into my having a rural background and having fished quite a bit. So that's how it works for me in the movement of words and phrases and idioms through culture. So I hope I answered that question. Oh, sorry.
I'm not going to answer or respond to your comment, but what you have me thinking about actually is the untranslatable, and so I'm kind of interested in what's not able to be translated when it comes to the poetic, whether it be a kind of visual moment that's kind of unreadable, or that's the kind of effect that I want the binary code moments in the book to have. It's unreadable in the instant of experiencing it, and it becomes a kind of, the effect is primarily visual. Although a friend of mine who teaches in the same program that I used to teach in at Bard College in upstate New York, had his students do a performance of just the binary code. And it was a kind of choral performance that I missed, but I heard about again and again when I went up to visit. So where they are kind of just reading the ones and zeros in this kind of overlapping choral moment. And then they manipulated the text where they would read just lines from the book to kind of interject. And so, it's not translation exactly as much as it is this kind of interpretation or kind of reinterpretation of the text that is there. So I'm kind of interested in those moments. And when I read from Discipline, actually, my editor, says, it's really to be read in sequence, which is what I did today. But often I mix things around in order to get at the, kind of those, I guess not untranslatable possibilities, but, kind of like something else in the text to discover something as a reader myself or as a writer myself. And so, I mean, maybe untranslatable to me, which maybe goes back to your your original question about, is it a love poem? Is it not a love poem? Like something that, I can kind of learn from re-experiencing the work in a different way as I read.
I'm likewise interested in the untranslatable, and sort of echoing something I think Brent said earlier. I try and stay present to the idea that the translation is not possible, right? And, that I've done translations, and I've consistently been struck by the fact that I'm versioning these poems. I'm not translating anything, really. And so when I move to a poem like the written by himself, here I'm, as Charles pointed out earlier, I'm a Yankee, families from Philadelphia, nothing Southern about me. But there's this textual material that we all are steeped in, and so I'm kind of interested in the distance between my reality and these texts, right? So not just the historical distance, but the sort of biographical distance, and not only the distance, but the simultaneous centrality of these texts to my identity as well, right? And so there's just sort of manipulating and contending with that paradox. I find there's a lot of irony and just sort of fruitful possibilities in.
Thank you guys. It was really, really a great reading. One of the, I think for me as a listener, a thread I heard kind of connecting the three together was just the idea or the image of the body. And I was wondering if you might talk to us about how the body functions in. Should I just start over again? Okay, thanks. It was great. No, but I was saying how, at least as a listener, one thing that I kept hearing again was some kind of references explicitly or implicitly to the body. And I was curious if you could talk about, any of you if you want to, how the body functions for you, either in the work you present or in your larger kind of body of work.
So whoever wants
I'll just say a little bit about that, which is I think the body in my work is often the body or a body. It's also a shifting I as you proceed through the work. I mean, across books too, that the I sometimes becomes she, becomes it. In part because they're, to illustrate a kind of unstable identity, but also that it's a kind of representative figure perhaps, and that it to kind of emphasize its corporeal nature, like the kind of especially in this last book in Discipline, the kind of the way that speech is in some way a difficult aspect of its being. One of the things that I'm interested in is this kind of like guttural speech, or this kind of stammer that happens to not be visible in this text as it was in my first book, but I often read it that way. Again, to try to get to some kind of, before I was talking about untranslatabilities, but I guess this time kind of like unspeakabilities, like, kind of what almost can't be spoken, which is, why the emphasis on the kind of corporeal or the body parts or the body in fragments or something like that.
Well, I have an obsession with the body, and for various reasons, but I'll name a couple. One, I had very free parents, like nude beach parents, right? And because of that, I find that I love the body and all its variegations, and I think it was traumatizing to me when I was maybe 6 or 7 when I realized the world did not love the body in all its variegations, and constantly being struck at different points in my life with various reductions and narrowing inside of various cultures and regions and groups. And I found it all so ridiculous. So what I did was kind of develop a hidden aesthetic. And I think this is the very first time I've ever talked about it, by the way. And that hidden aesthetic was mine and mine alone, because I've never met the body I didn't enjoy. So I wanted to write the body in my own way, and I like to think about monstrosity too. I kind of use creatures in my work, like sirens and beasts, etc., minotaurs and centaurs, as a way to kind of interrogate aspects of the body we don't want to look at. I've had, I particularly remember one time I had a student, a young girl, who wouldn't take off her socks. She wouldn't take off her socks because her feet had been hideously tortured by her family. And she was in a foster situation after that. But she was so ashamed that I remember just insisting one day she take off her socks, and I touched her feet. And I think from that moment on, my work was just kind of infused with a kind of interrogation of why we can't love bodies, why our aesthetics are so narrow, and why my aesthetic can't be narrowed. You know, it's almost frightening to me how much beauty I find. So it shows up in the work that way. I hope I answered your question. Yeah.
Okay. So I saw Regine had a question.
Thank you so much. They were so wonderful, your readings. And I guess my question, Vievee, your poem about the girl with the purple shorts really moved me. And my work is on representations of sexual violence. And so my question, I don't want to be too kind of facile in how we use translation, right? Because translation, you know, as Brent's essay told us, translation and representation aren't necessarily the same thing. But I do think a lot about representing violence and translating violence. And, you know, when you mentioned what's untranslatable or unspeakable, and that's a question that I wrestle with a lot in terms of the writers that I work on, or the cultural workers who I think about. And you see this coming up over again when people represent suffering or atrocity, and they talk about this difficulty. And you also in one of your poems with the reading of Corregidora, or the improvisation on that. And so I just thought I would take the occasion to ask you to just riff a little bit, you know, just talk a little bit about what that's like. And Dawn, I'm sure, you know, you too. You know, how do you write violence, you know, in your poem, in your work? How do you approach that? What is that process like for you?
I can't not write violence because I've experienced a lot of violence and I've seen a lot of violence. So to not write violence would be to deny, I don't know, and would be to deny a kind of a large aspect of what makes me in the making of myself. But you know, it was interesting earlier today that we talked about that, and who am I beholden to? I mean, I can deny the violence and not write it, and I can make people feel better about it. And I can be beholden to editors that might like me to write that or not write that. I don't answer to any of them. I answer to myself, and maybe it sounds a little bit cliche, but my own personal truth. And I also write about violence, so it's out there to be discussed and be talked about. And if it's not there, I won't write it. As long as it's there, I have to write it. So in that particular piece, actually someone had asked me to write a praise poem to James Brown. But James Brown was a wife beater. So how am I supposed to do that? Am I supposed to please the editor and say, oh, sure, here's your poem? But every time I wrote it, my uncle came into my head, right? And James Brown was, of course, that was who I listened to growing up through all of these things. So I decided that I had to let the text go the way it, the way it will. I couldn't and keep my integrity and write the praise song. But this is a sort of praise song, but it became a praise song to my aunt who passed away. And it became a kind of discussion of my uncle's life. I don't think I'm cruel to him. I think I'm honest about him. But those things just kind of blended together. So I do write violence, and again, I'll stop writing it when it's not there, So.
I hide from violence in the poems, and the way I do this, and I realize that I've been thinking about your questions, just Sean, all this time. The way I do this is by substituting texts for bodies, right? And so the intimacy that I'm able to accomplish in the poem is via the text. The violence that I'm able to explore in the poem is made safe via the text. Right, so I'm mediating all of this this very sort of intimate interaction by the intellectual framework, but that's what it is. What was it? So there's a quote I'm thinking of. I'll come back to it.
Interrupt me if it does.
Okay.
I didn't read from my first book today, but A Gathering of Matter, A Matter of Gathering, is kind of what's underneath it is predominantly sexual violence. But the way that it's kind of configured in the text is through myth, and also this is the unspeakability that kind of haunts both works, right? So how do you speak it? Becomes the question that fuels the text, right? Getting around it, like, is it possible to be said? Is it possible to be represented? Some of my thinking comes from Mallarmé's A Tomb for Anatole, the posthumous book about the death of his son, that was not intended in some ways to be published ever, but was, and what you get is a kind of series of attempts, these kind of fragments and M-dashes, these fragments and M-dashes, the thing that can kind of never be written, which becomes in some way, to me, more powerful than if it had been, finished, or, like you were talking about Doug Kearney's, earlier, right? Yeah, if it had been a kind of complete utterance. And so in some ways I think that the way to kind of write trauma of any sort, whether it be sexual violence of any sort, for me anyway, is to kind of inhabit the traumatic in language. Like, what does trauma do to language, right? It makes it you almost can't speak.
Can I add something about your work? So I want to add something about Dawn's work that's striking to me, because I feel she captures violence better than I do. I mean, my poem was entitled Say It Any Way You Can, as a way of saying this is the only way I can say it. I can't get any closer to it than this. But because you have ellipses, you have these spaces, these silences, and I think really, especially in female trauma, silence is so often the response. Silence is the place where you go. You get a few words in, and then nothing. It drops there, or even if you listen to like children, older children, not babies, but past a toddler, when they begin to have understanding, when they start to get upset, they go so far and then it just stops. They're crying and then it just stops, and they can't, there's like, and they're trying to get the cry out. And that's what I feel in your work. So it's almost more than I can take, hearing it, because I fill it in with my own experience of violence.
So Charles?
Yes, this is the same question.
Charles is...
I just wanted to ask Don Lundy Martin a question. Your reading is haunting to me, your voice. is very much haunting to me. And I think it's the rhythm in which you read. And then I started wondering, it's your breathing as performance. That is, I think I will have to carry that to my home in my head tonight, and I'm frightened. Will you talk about that?
To talk about the breathing, it is important in the performance, and that's one of the things I think that can't be, I guess it can be, but it isn't necessarily registered on the page in the way that I might want it to, because I haven't kind of invented my own way of doing that. But I like Danielle Colbert, or Colbert, in the anglicized version, who has this book called, it's called Il Donc, or It Then, which is a really traumatic text, kind of, and it was instructive to me in terms of the breath, because when you read it out loud, it forces a kind of inhale and exhale. And so I was just I started thinking about that gasp of what happens at the end of an almost sentence as you almost want, or trying to speak it or something like that. I like that it can only happen for me at this point in the performance of the text and not necessarily on the page. And I guess even if it were on the page in some way, you wouldn't necessarily to get that, which is why I'm always leaning into the microphone, because if there's not the microphone, obviously it doesn't happen. I mean, I don't know what more to say about it than that, actually.
We probably have time for 2 or 3 more questions.
I don't know.
Just to follow up.
And then I'll
Okay. I was actually following Vievee's point and also Charles's point, Dawn. Like in the first collection of in the first collection of poems, I loved all the stutter, just to read the stutter. And what I heard today was I can hear the stammer in the silences. Like maybe it's the way you're breathing, just seeing you. Like you hear, stutter something that's supposed to be audible. You should hear the stutter, but it's almost in the silences I could hear you stammer. Just wanted to say that.
No, I got it. Okay, do you want to respond to that, or do you want to go up here? Okay. Hortense?
Thank you very much for the reading. It was very enjoyable. I would like to ask a question, but I'm not sure that it would be relevant to any of the 3 readers, because you're all younger people. But I'm wondering if there is, because I think there is a relationship between writing and the body. Going back to the body. And I say this to students all the time, that maybe what I want you to do in a writing course is throw your computer out the window and write with your hands, with your fingers, handwriting, and then go to the computer. I was wondering if in writing poetry, in producing it, have you found your relationship to words on the page different with the computer? But you're probably of generations that never did anything else but write at the computer. But if not, could you talk about just process and body and writing?
I learned to write, I'm pre-computer actually, so I learned to write by hand. I'm 47, so I started writing when I was 19, so I pen and page, and I still do pen and page, and then I transcribe it, then I put it on computer.
I often write with butcher paper on the wall and marker. Yeah, so sort of Venn diagram type things, and I find that's very kinetic. And it keeps me dancing. I do, yeah.
I love that. I only write using a computer. Actually, I can barely read my own handwriting. It's part of the problem. But I'm a micro editor, so it helps to use the computer. So I edit kind of in the, every few words. By the time I get to the end of the poem, I'm no longer doing any real editing. I kind of edit as, I go along in a very kind of slow way. So the computer really helps me to do that efficiently without wasting time and paper, I guess. Yeah.
So I believe, yes.
I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed all the readings, but especially when you started talking about trauma, because when you started talking about, when you said something about stuttering, I thought about a poem by Lucille Clifton, What Did She Know and When Did She Know It? And she says, she starts off with what it was, and then from then on out, the poem becomes, she takes you into the experience. And Vievee, when I was listening to your poem, you first started off in a narrative way, and then it became kind of percussive, as you began to layer that experience. And one of the questions that occurred to me was, what is the speaker's relationship to the audience in the moment? Here are two relationships, I guess. What is the speaker's relationship to the audience in the moment of the poem? And what is the poet's relationship to the audience after the poem has been written, when you're looking at the poem already written on the page? So there are two relationships.
Thank you.
This is for me. Yeah. In that poem, Say It Any Way You Can, the speaker's relationship to the audience is, the speaker is speaking to the audience, is saying, here is the story, and I'm stating it for you to hear. So I'm saying it to whoever's going to listen. The author's relationship to the speaker after it's over, it's very cathartic for me, since I feel like I put myself in the place of the speaker. So then after it's over, what I feel is relief. I feel the same thing that the speaker, is going to feel, So the speaker says it, and through that speaker, I get the relief. So.
I don't know. I will say that there's, sometimes when I read some of the poems from Discipline, I'll say things to the audience like, this is a true story. So I wouldn't actually, there's a way in which that speaker is a little bit of a trickster, to kind of like name it as a true story in order to kind of call attention in some way to its possibility of being a true story, but maybe not, like a true story for whom. And for me, it depends on the poem. In some ways, there's a kind of ghost speaker in a gathering of matter, because it's a kind of it's kind of like there's a mythological kind of invented factor there. And as a writer, I don't even know how to answer the question as a writer, actually.
Well, this goes back to, my idea that, or my difficulty in even getting to the page, having to wade through so much textual information that's already sort of burned onto my brain. Getting to the page is always through that crowd, and so the voice on the page, I just got tired of fighting, and trying to, again, an act of futility, ultimately trying to represent or capture some essential, authentic voice. Well, then instead I sort of steer into the storm and give up. The voice is all of this, and make use of it and sort of play with it, and it gives me. So I feel ambivalent about it because in one sense it gives me the sort of license and the objectivity to deal with the material and to deal with the voice, the lyric eye, and sort of put that lyric speaker in situations that I wouldn't want to be in myself, and sort of speak truths that I'm not sort of brave enough to speak on my own. But at the same time, going back to Jashawn's question about the body, I sort of shrug at that, and it's because that's my fear. That's where it's scary, and so while the mask of sort of these haunting voices, this textual past gives me license to speak. At the same time, it's a distancing technique. It keeps me at a safe remove. And so I'm conscious of that sort of cowardice that's built into the process too.
Okay, we're nearly out of time. Have I completely overlooked anyone? Okay. Well, this has been a really fabulous conversation that I know will continue through the weekend. So thank you all very much.